Hello everybody, my name is Stephen Bauman, and today I'm going to be talking about an artist that I'm absolutely certain that you've heard of. Whether you're an art student, you're a professional painter, or you're just a Joe or Jane on the street, then you know the name William Adolphe Bouguereau. He was an absolutely brilliant French 19th century artist and academic whose works have been collected by museums around the world. No doubt, if you like figurative art, you've seen his work in a museum and probably you have a postcard of it in your studio. Primarily, my conversation today is going to be about what we love about Bouguereau's work, but also I'm going to delve a little bit into the dark side and talk about some of the things that people would prefer if Bouguereau had done differently. For my part, I'm going to be on the side of Bouguereau and his work, but he is someone who divides opinion a bit in art appreciation, and I want to be balanced in the way that I present this to you. So let's just dive into the work itself. This is going to be kind of a survey of various aspects of his work, his techniques, the concepts at play in his work, and also what I think that we can learn from him, that we can take from his work and we can integrate into our own work. I wanted to start out with this image in particular because I feel like it offers a great sense of synopsis about what Bouguereau wanted to accomplish in his work. This particular painting was made in 1884. It was presented at the Salon that year in Paris, and then at exhibitions in London and Antwerp. Not too long ago, it went up for sale at Sotheby's in New York City, and I was lucky enough to be there with my wife, Cornelia Hannes, to take a look and to kind of pay homage to this absolute masterpiece. We can understand that it's probably one of the most important pieces in Bouguereau's entire canon of work, and maybe we have to put it alongside also his painting of the nymphs and satyr, which was also at one point exhibited in New York at the Metropolitan. Once again, I was lucky enough to see it there. In both of these paintings, the figures are either life-size or even a bit larger than life-size. This painting here in particular is about 20 feet wide, so that can give you some sense of the context as to what height the figures are. Now, if you don't know a lot about Bouguereau's techniques, it's very likely that you've heard that he was into glazing and all sorts of indirect processes, and no doubt all of those techniques are evident here in this painting. But I want to zoom in for a moment and talk about something that he doesn't get enough credit for. And that is for being a very direct painter. This close-up here is from the central nude figure. And what you can see is a tremendous clarity with which the paint is being laid down on the surface. It almost reminds me of artists who maybe he is compared to in the French 19th century, like Bauman, who get all the credit for being very direct painters, whereas Bouguereau is referred to as this guy that just glazes and tickles the canvas with his brush. I think he's a painter with a lot more gusto than that, in fact. Now, the other thing that we see in this close-up very easily is another thing that we absolutely adore about Bouguereau, and that's his use of color in flesh tones. If we take a few samples of these color values and compare them here at the edge of the canvas, we can see such a great degree of color harmony taking place. All muted forms of the original colors that came off of his palette, which inevitably combine so well and so smoothly that it almost seems as if they were fated to combine in exactly this way. Looking at them here on the side of the canvas, it almost seems like there is less color diversity here. This is simply due to the fact that they harmonize so well with one another, and they are also all integrated into the volume that he's producing in this form. With Bouguereau especially, there's always going to be that little bit of a turn of form around the edge. You're very unlikely to find any sense of kind of flatness or abstraction in his work that maybe we associate with more contemporary painters. But before I spend all of my time here, let's move on to another image. Now, this knee is something I've made a couple diagrams about in the past. If you follow me on Instagram, at Stephen Bauman Artwork, you've probably seen them, but I want to open it up here a little bit as well. In this life-size painting of a knee, not only do we find a tremendous sense of that gusto I was talking about. I mean, look at these brush strokes here, really beautifully arranged, really direct, nothing sort of wimpy or glazy about them. But he's also showing us so much about his knowledge of anatomy. It's really tremendous to see. Just looking, for instance, at the arrangement of the quadriceps, we can see really clearly the vastus medialis coming down here, the rectus femoris coming down in the center, and the vastus lateralis here on the edge, all connecting to the quadriceps tendon, which then goes on to envelop the patella and eventually attach to the tibia via the tibial tuberosity here. We see really clearly the upper plane of the patella and also that shield-like shape to the front of it. All of this can be seen very well if you have the anatomical background to recognize it, but even to an eye that's not attuned to that, I think you do get the gist of it in the sense that you can see the realism through the expression of complexity of the human form. I want to talk for a little bit about some of the work that he's really well known for, and namely that is his portraiture. Now, though this entire painting comprises a nude seated figure in a kind of water cave somewhere near a beach, presumably. I want to zoom in on the portrait. I want to talk about his application of paint. I want to talk about his edges, his paint handling, and also, once again, this topic of glazing, which maybe I should make a little bit less ambiguous, this idea of glazing. What is it? How do we do it? Technically, what does that mean? Because I think that it is something that is really tossed around when talking about painting, and some of us are not so certain exactly what it means. Glazing is specifically this: to paint a transparent layer of transparent pigments over the top of a dried surface. It is the brother to the sister that is scumbling, which is to paint a transparent layer of opaque pigments over a dried surface. Let's take a look at some areas in specific. Right here, for me, this is a great example of what scumbling looks like. This color that he's chosen in that area seems to be painted transparently over a dried surface using a paint mixture that has enough lead white in it to be relatively opaque. It is possible, perhaps, that in some of the darker areas of this painting that he could have been glazing in different colors, but I'm going to be perfectly honest and maybe go against what the popular opinion is and say that I think a lot of this was probably painted relatively directly and more often scumbled than glazed. I'm sure that in the comments section there's going to be people coming after me about this. I know that he glazed in his work, I totally get it, but we're going to look at also some examples of how he used paint, and I simply want to contend that he didn't achieve these results simply by glazing. Glazing is not necessarily always the answer to subtlety. It's just one technique in many that can help us get to a place. While we're here though, let's talk about edges. Oh my goodness. All of these beautifully rendered soft transitions. Look at the light shape of the chin, for instance, turning from light into shadow. The dark halftone, so subtle and cool as it transitions into this really beautiful dark mauve shadow. And in terms of what we love about Bouguereau, I think this is very much the association I have when I talk about what I love about him. And I'll explain exactly what that is. Yes, there is softness. Yes, there is definitely subtlety and smooth transitions. However, he never misses the clarity of a definition of plane. And that is why the form and structure in his paintings is really so excellent. Now, for those of you who are a little bit unfamiliar with what I mean when I say planes, planes are essentially the simplified answer to how we create form in a painting. If we take a look at this 2D shape right here, we have essentially flatness. No form, no volume. When we apply a directional light source concept to that flat shape, we can understand that that flat shape is inferring to us a sense of volume. What that means is that on this left side, we should expect to find a shadow. This plane on the left here is facing away from the light source. We'll then likely have a kind of a mid-tone plane in the center here, which is facing not away from the light source, but also not directly at it either. And then we have, of course, on the right-hand side, this very light plane that's facing directly towards the light source. Now, one of the things that's so cool and that is so efficiently done by Bouguereau, I think, is how he manages to have that softness, to have that sense of transition, but never makes his planes ambiguous. By that I mean, if I'm looking for, let's say, color inside of this intermediate plane, or I'm looking for variation, and I start to add values to this plane, and I start to find reflected lights in the shadows, and I start to find variation inside the lightest plane, and find some deep crevices on that side, and I find more really bright reflected light on the dark side of the form, you can understand how very quickly, and this happens to painting students all the time, we lose that sense of form or that sense of volume. Our shape goes from being beautiful and volumetric to being very flat once again, because we've lost a sense of what the plane's value should be in relationship to that primary light source. Going back to Bouguereau and that explanation I was making about what I loved about him, when we squint down, which is a technique we use to understand a little bit better value variation, and we start to analyze the separations and distinctions in between these planes and how each one of them contains a ton of variety of color and just enough variety in value to show the roundness within the plane, but they never betray each other. There's always such a clear sense of form and a clear sense of structure in his work. And I think that's what leads it to be impressive. If you have simply refinement, that's okay, but it's not great. If you have simply good color values, that's fine, but it's not great. If you have simply structure, the same thing. But when you combine all those things together, structure, color variety, harmony, value, light effect, Bouguereau exhibits all of these things at a very high quality. Now, as I said in the description of this video and in all the polls leading up to it, there was going to be some things I wanted to mention about how Bouguereau is viewed by the art appreciating public. And by this I mean a lot of times art students. People will complain that his work is a little bit saccharine, that it's too sweet. I've even heard it to be said, if only he had painted things that were a little bit more gritty, a little bit more bombastic. As if to say that Bouguereau's technique was all that he had and the subject matter he chose was not so interesting to them. Now, everybody has a sense of taste and opinion, and we've all got to have that. My response to these critiques of Bouguereau's work would be this: you can't order wine and complain that it doesn't taste enough like beer. If you want gritty subject matter, if you want realism, if you want difficult, challenging paintings, then you're not after a Bouguereau painting. Which, by the way, is not at all to diminish what he accomplished. I think that feelings are feelings. Whether you're excited about something or you're relaxed, both of those are a feeling that you have. So when you look at Bouguereau's work and it's calm and it's pleasing and it's harmonious, while that might not excite you or get your adrenaline going, still it's having an emotional effect on you. And really, a lot of times in artwork, that's what we want. We want it to help us feel something, or to see something in it that reminds us of something that we feel about the world. So once again, if you don't like Bouguereau, it's fine, it's good, but also we can't blame Bouguereau for being Bouguereau. Now I'm gonna close out with this painting here, which, by the way, apropos of the comments I was just making, I think it denies that Bouguereau did not deal with subject matter that was in fact a little bit edgy. The title to this painting, as with all of his paintings, is in French, and so I won't try to read that, but essentially the topic here is the first death. And so it is about mourning, it is about loss, but it is also an iconic and idealized vision of that. This was Bouguereau. He saw the world through his lens, and he interpreted paint in such an amazing and beautiful way, and in a variety of ways. It was not just glazing, it was not just scumbling. There's direct painting, there's impastos, there's depth and transparency. I haven't even gotten into his sense of design and composition or arrangement of color values. You could write a book. In fact, I'm sure books have been written. Go find them. Learn about this artist. He's absolutely amazing. So we're going to wrap it up here. This is just a quick primer on William Adolphe Bouguereau's work. There are so many different books of it out there that you can find. There was recently a 2-volume catalogue raisonné that was put out by the same people that run the ARC. So there's no shortage of places where you can kind of drill down and get into what he was all about. There's also plenty of great high-res images online that you can find very easily. A quick Google and a visit to Wikipedia will get you quite a few of them. I definitely keep a few on my iPad in my inspiration folder for when I'm looking at my painting and I just can't figure out what to do. I flick through a couple Bouguereau paintings, I feel a little bit of shame and a little bit of envy, and then I get back to work. Thank you so much for watching today, and if you like the content on this channel, please remember to like and subscribe. And if you're interested in portrait tutorials, both in drawing and in oil painting, feel free to visit my Patreon page. There's a link to it that should be coming up here in just a second. And of course, pretty soon there's going to be another video coming out in this series where I'm going to be talking about either Antonio Mancini or Berta Wegmann. Thanks again. Take care.